Good afternoon and welcome to Accelerate Your City, Driving Consumer Adoption Through Public and Private Partnerships, a webinar sponsored by Smart Columbus and the Electrification Coalition. We are grateful to have you today. I'm Jennifer Benning, the Director of Communications for Smart Columbus, and I'll be your moderator right now and during the Q&A. So if you have any questions as this presentation goes on, feel free to pop your questions into the Q&A module. This webinar is part of our effort to share the outcomes of the $10 million grant awarded by the Paul G. Allen Family Foundation to the City of Columbus as the winner of the Smart City Challenge. Additional insights and information about our program are available at accelerateyourcity.com, and we'll be talking about that at the end of our presentation as well. But because we have a lot of content to share with you today, let's get right into our presentation. Joining us today are Matt Stevens-Rich from the Electrification Coalition, Jordan Davis with Smart Columbus, and Allegra Wiesler with Ohio Health. Matt, I'll turn things right over to you.
Thanks, Jennifer. Yeah, I'll keep it really quick. Like Jennifer said, we have a lot of content we're going to cover. So the Electrification Coalition, we're a national nonprofit that partners across a number of projects, all focused around rapid vehicle electrification. We've worked across a lot of different programs, Smart Columbus being one of our most recent successes. And really, we come at it from a lens of energy security and being sure we can tackle our energy dependency, often which is reliant on foreign oil, and being able to advance domestic sources of energy, vehicle electrification naturally segmenting into that. And really what we're going to focus on today, which Jordan and Allegra will take us through, is what we at the EC like calling the Accelerator community model. So this is just the whole notion that in order to advance vehicle electrification in a region or a city, that you focus on a very specific collaboration of public, private, and other partners coming together so you can advance policy, advance consumer adoption, fleet electrification, charging, the whole 9 yards, and be able to come together. So this is a very loose graph of what Smart Columbus looks like. There's a lot more nuances to it. But overall, it's a program that we've been able to really focus on across a couple of key regions. And Smart Columbus is a really good example of how that plays out. So with that, I'll throw it back to the group so we can get going.
So I would love to talk you through how we have developed the Smart Columbus Electrification Program, and to Matt's point, really how we accelerated the adoption rate here by leveraging the network of partners that we have in our community. So the Smart Columbus Electrification Program, as Jennifer shared, was awarded to the City of Columbus as part of the 2016 U.S. Department of Transportation Smart City Challenge. This was the philanthropic $10 million grant that was awarded alongside of that from the Paul G. Allen Family Foundation. And the program itself took a holistic look at how we could electrify the transportation sector in order to reduce GHG emissions. And so the program had 5 different priority areas, everything from decarbonizing and modernizing the grid, electrifying fleets, both public and private, transitioning shared and public transit to electric, increasing the adoption of consumer purchasing of electric vehicles, and then really taking a robust regional approach to building out our charging infrastructure. And from this program today, we're going to talk primarily about Area 4. But as a setup to that, I think it is appropriate to celebrate that we have really gotten to an average that we believe is really solid and lines up with our end goal, which was to get to 1.8% of new vehicle sales would be electric by the end of the program. And this was a 3-year program. When we applied, our baseline starting point was 0.37%. So we had quite a bit of work to do, and we're excited to share with you how we did it. So in some ways here, this talks about all of the progress that has been made to the goal. So from the decarbonization and modernizing the grid, we partnered with our utility, American Electric Power, who is one of our most significant partners in the work, and they installed 552,000 smart meters. The City of Columbus was the largest purchaser of fleet vehicles, so of 300 and a little over 300 electric vehicles were added and introduced to their fleet. We also saw some really creative and great private sector, most notably from Columbus Yellow Cab, who has initiated a process to transitioning their entire fleet to electric through this program. And so we were excited to partner with them. American Electric Power also stepped up with an innovative pilot where we were able to install over 900 electric vehicle charging stations, and those are still going into the ground this year, even amidst COVID. Our dealers stepped up significantly. Over 40% of our regional car dealerships are part of what we call the Electrified Dealer Program, which ensures that they're prepared to meet a customer at the door and introduce them to electric vehicles. We had some incredible education programs, which we will talk about in greater detail next. So as I mentioned, our goal of getting to 1.8%, and this really was accelerated by engaging our employers in what we so thoughtfully called the Accelerator Partner Program. We had a theory that we could access the majority of early adopters from our largest employers. And here's a quick video to show you more of our program.
When Columbus won the U.S. Smart Cities Challenge, our adoption rate of electric vehicles was 0.37% of all new car sales were electric. And we hope to get to 1.8% of all new car sales are electric by the year 2020. So the Accelerator Partners Program is our way of engaging our largest employers in the region to help us meet our adoption goals. We currently have 48 different companies in the Columbus region committed to our goals as Smart Columbus, and we have a goal of getting to 100 companies as part of the effort. So there's two adoption curves that we hope that they work on with us, the adoption of electric vehicles, and the second is the reduction of single occupant vehicle traffic.
I think it just makes sense for us. We're really about making Columbus a better place. This is our home. We want to make this the best possible city it can be. It's good for business for us. It helps us attract the right kind of people to Huntington. And it's also good for our employees and the rest of the community. And anything that's going to promote that is right within our mission.
One of the primary education offerings that we're engaging our companies around is the Smart Columbus Ride and Drive Roadshow. We've been spending a lot of our first year building out this program as something that will tour around the city, going to different workplaces and different corporate campuses that engage their workforce and get them in the seat of an electric vehicle.
As part of our partnership with Smart Cities, we'll be hosting ride and drive events, both at our Linden facility and our Easton facility as we roll throughout this year.
In year two, we'll be focused on using these ride and drives as a platform for our accelerator companies to build upon.
Ohio State is an acceleration partner because it allows us to work with smart city experts to develop mobility and transportation research options that work to help the community become even more sustainable and make these transportation initiatives available to all.
It educates our employee base on a changing transportation environment. We know that things need to change. We know that we'd like to see Columbus kind of lead that change, and educating people on the other transportation options they have, I think puts us ahead of other cities as we move forward.
That was a good little preview of what I'm going to share with you. And just another reminder, if you have any questions, please feel free to add them into the chat today, and we will do our best to answer them through our remarks. So we began, as you've heard, at a 0.37% of new car sales were electric, which meant in order to get to where we wanted to be, which was 1.8, we still were really in that early adopter phase. So our consumer adoption strategy was much broader, following the entire consumer journey from everything from online marketing to resident engagement at more mainstream, broader events like festivals and the like, down to dealer engagement and even building owner affinity programs. But what we're going to talk to you today is really about how we strive to reach the early adopters at these medium to large employers. So we established a program called the Accelerator Partner Program. And every company we asked to commit to 5 different commitment areas. And we're going to walk you through what those commitments were, as we think this is really replicable for other communities around the country. So in the first area is to empower a leader. And that really was important to us because this is the liaison for how we will engage across all the efforts. Without a strong point of contact that is empowered to work directly with us, it would be much harder to get the level of frequency and regularity of engagement and the depth of engagement that we sought to achieve. So with the empowered leader, that was like ticket number 1 to becoming a part of the program. And from there, we had asked specifically for a senior leader, someone in the C-suite that could elevate and help remove barriers to keep things moving. And then we also asked for a mobility ambassador. And those mobility ambassadors were really the primary point of contact and kind of the program manager that kept and fulfilled the commitments on behalf of the company and made sure things were moving forward. You can keep going to the next slide for me, Matt. Next one for me. Great. We ended up having 60 different mobility ambassadors enlisted in the program, which represents 60 different companies. And they were from all different parts of the company. Some were in government relations, some were in strategic business lines, some were in facilities and operations, other in sustainability, other in HR. It really ranged, but I think the common characteristic were these were, talented people that the companies trusted to work across departments to bring these efforts forward. And Allegra is one of the most outstanding mobility ambassadors and has been really shepherding significant progress at a great company and healthcare system here, Ohio Health, and she'll be sharing more about her experience. So the second commitment was asking our companies to buy electric, and it really was in 2 different ways. One was we wanted people to model the way from the C-suite. So how do we get an executive to drive electric? And we thought that was important because if we had an electric vehicle owner, we thought that that would be a voice that could advocate for workplace charging and other infrastructure needs. And then the second was, how do we get the company to actually introduce electric vehicles into their fleet? We found that the electric vehicles into the fleet was the hardest challenge of all that we ventured in, just because of the varying degrees of size of the fleets, the different purchase cycles, the different ways in which they manage the fleet. Some outsourced, some fully owned it. And so it's kind of misleading to think that every company can just make a standard commitment. It's very individualized and took a lot of hand-holding and analysis and effort. But we were able to do quite a substantial job given all of those challenges. And so if you go to the next slide for me, Matt, and Matt was our lead. Well, so we hit our executive goal. That was great. 50 companies, 50 executives. That's wonderful. But more notably was the fleet goal. And Matt was our lead in fleet, and we are really excited that we were able to get 350 committed electric vehicles from the private sector, and that really is substantial because that represents a lot of different organizations. And having to do analysis on all of those fleets to lead them to purchase, as well as to engage a very large pool of businesses and organizations of different types and sizes that are using their fleets for all different business use cases. Then the third commitment was installing charging infrastructure. And that was really, this is absolutely essential. We found early on in our research and building our program that residents or customers are 10% more likely to buy an electric vehicle if they have workplace charging at their work site. And at the time, we had about 3 Accelerator partners that had charging at a work site. So this was not a factor in anyone's consideration of purchase, arguably, within our region, and it certainly did contribute to the charging range anxiety issues that we needed to overcome in order to increase the electric vehicle adoption. So in increasing corporate charging, incredibly important piece. And so now we have about 63 different work sites with charging, and it's all around the region, and we're really proud about this. And this would not have been possible without American Electric Power and their charging rebate program that they put together. And they were able to put forth about $9 million to help subsidize much of this investment. And this was a significant way that we were able to do this so quickly within 3 years, and a great role for the utility to play moving forward. Our fourth commitment was having our employers serve as education platforms for the residents of our region. These employers make up about a third of or so of the workforce here, and so there is tremendous access to residents who spend about 80% of their work week in those offices. So how can we bring the information about where our community is going and how electrification can be a part of their lives to them and meet them where they are at their workplace? And so we had two platforms of engagement in which our partners got engaged in. So the first was Smart Columbus Live. So this was intended for a more leadership audience of key stakeholders. So we encourage C-suites or other business units that were related to our work to come through a 2-hour training session around the future of mobility, what our Smart Cities platform was, what the vision was, and what we were going to do about it. We had over 1,500 people participate in these programs. We did them every Tuesday for about 9 months and 3 times every Tuesday. So it was a significant commitment of time, but we think brought a lot of people along in the journey that we started off on. And then upon the conclusion of this program, we quickly launched a few months later the Ride and Drive Roadshow. And this brought the education about Smart Columbus and electrification to residents more closely. And so this program toured to about 120 different events, primarily all work sites, and conducted nearly 12,000 educational EV test drives. And this is the largest effort of its kind, and we are really proud of the results. We strongly believe that nobody will buy an EV unless they've had an experience with it first, and this really helped really helped change perceptions and get people firsthand experiences. The way that we took this on was slightly different than what we had seen in other communities or in other executions. We really emphasized the upfront education. We thought it's less about the car at the end of the day and more about their relationship between electrification and how that could be a choice for them in the future. We had tremendous participation and support from the OEMs. We had about 12 different vehicle models on tour with the program. And the upfront education was completely brand agnostic so that people understood the benefits of electrification, and then they had the brand choice component of the vehicle. And to couple that, to make sure they had a good experience, we had staffed each vehicle with a brand ambassador that really understood the vehicle, that could educate the resident during their test drive. And then the fifth commitment is really around driving less. So the fifth commitment was around commuter benefit incentives. So how can our employers partner with the community to encourage people to not just drive electric, but to also drive less? Because reducing the vehicle miles traveled and reducing commuter congestion will in the end also contribute and potentially contribute greater to the GHG emissions. And so we wrapped around our electrification education with other sustainable commute options that we helped educate residents on. So we can go to the next slide. I think we talked through that. And so with this behavior change piece, we set some goals around not just coupling the education, but to also do it through actual tangible incentives that compelled people to act after they were educated. And we wanted to do that in both dimensions, both in getting residents to drive less, but also getting them to drive electric. So we launched what we called the Ignite Action Fund. And this essentially matched employer investment of up to $15,000 that they would put towards incentives that would result in one of those two behaviors, a employee driving less or driving electric. And we saw such creativity from our employers on both of these fronts, whether it was offering incentives for people to buy e-bikes or incentives to get chargers in their homes, incentives for direct purchases of electric vehicles, and then a variety of shared commute programs, different flagship mobility weeks on campuses. There was such a variety of programs that really allowed for the companies to put forth the ideas that worked best for their culture, but also that had the ownership and the responsibilities of the people of the company. It wasn't us telling them what to do or anything like that. They really took the ideas of their employees and put forward and implemented what they thought would work best. And we saw great success across this program with 31 different companies stepping up to implement one of those programs. And over 1,000 different employees took advantage of one of those direct benefits that got them to either drive electric or drive less. So in summary, we have really seen tremendous success, and where we have not seen success, we have made it up in other ways with engaging companies outside of the group. But it really has been an incredible response. And without, I think, these goals and these North Stars, I'm not sure we would have even seen remotely the momentum that we've been able to achieve. And I would say the other big component of this is every company is very different. So on this next slide, you'll see how certain companies have achieved, 100% of all five, some 90, some 75%. But we've seen such substantial variety. So even we have invited a few smaller organizations that might not own their own real estate, but they found ways to really step up. Even if they can't install workplace charging because they don't own the property, they found other ways to influence and to support the effort, even if they can't influence all five. So it's been so incredible, the support from all of these companies and partners. And none more notable than Ohio Health. Ohio Health has been a tremendous partner, and Allegra has been on the ground building their program. So I'm excited to turn it over to her.
Thanks, Jordan. Yep, as you mentioned, my name is Allegra Wiesler. I run the sustainability program for Ohio Health, and I was also the mobility ambassador for Ohio Health. So in case you don't know who we are a not-for-profit healthcare system located in Central Ohio. We have over 30,000 associate physicians and volunteers. So we are one of the largest organizations in Central Ohio. If we go to the next slide, we have just over 12 hospitals located throughout Central Ohio with over 60 outpatient locations. And our largest anchor hospital is Riverside Methodist Hospital here in Columbus, Ohio, which is where we did majority of our piloting program for single occupant vehicle reduction, which I will mention in a little bit. If you want to go to the next slide. So why does the healthcare system partner with Smart Columbus to get involved in this work? I think that the number one reason is really this environmental and public health impact that we see transportation having on our community. And then we also saw this as an opportunity to provide associate and community benefits through charging station infrastructure, as well as the image of fleet vehicles running around Central Ohio, servicing all of our patients. So we have offered free charging to all of our associates and community visitors and patients, as well as visible locations for our charging stations and for our fleet vehicle. Next. So a really big integral part of why this was so successful for us, I think, is the steering team we created internally. As Jordan mentioned, we did have a senior leader designated to run the efforts with Smart Columbus, but the senior leader took this and expanded this to an internal steering team to help us accomplish each of the goals. And the goals provided by Smart Columbus helped us dictate exactly which members of our senior leadership team needed to be involved towards each of the different goals. So we have obviously myself with sustainability, which is a clear connection. We also had someone from marketing and communications involved, someone from human resources, legal, community relations, and logistics. And I think all the different stakeholders involved in this team is really what made this so successful for us. And I highly recommend it for anyone moving forward and doing any of this work, because it is really a collective effort. So high level, a few of the things we've done with Smart Columbus is this associate engagement work, this big education piece. So we really looked at how do we reduce our single occupant vehicle usage from our associates? How are they carpooling, getting to work? Are they biking? Are they using public transportation? And then from a fleet assessment standpoint, what does our fleet even look like? How do we decarbonize our fleet? And then how do we integrate this in the future with any procurement policies looking forward? And then we definitely looked at workplace charging. As Jordan mentioned, we saw this as a clear indication of that range anxiety. We've so far installed nearly 60 charging stations across our system throughout Central Ohio. And here's a kind of a map to give you an idea of where our charging stations are. We send this out to all of our visitors, patients, located on our intranet for our associates. So something that we've used to indicate kind of this proactive approach that we've taken to provide this benefit for our associates and community at each of our different care sites and office buildings. So from an associate engagement standpoint, we really wanted to target this educational piece because we agree with Jordan that this is kind of key to being successful. It's something very new for a lot of people. It was new for us. So the associate engagement was this internal piece that was kind of the main pain point for us when we first started. So if you want to go ahead. So we looked at SOV reduction. We started out step one with a mobility survey that we provided to Riverside Methodist, which again is our main kind of largest hospital here in Columbus, Ohio. We did a mobility survey that essentially asked our associates, how are you getting to work? Why are you getting to work that way? What would entice you to commute differently? Are you aware of other options of sustainably commuting to work, such as the different bus stops we have on site, bike racks, carpooling? And then what would it take you to kind of rethink how you're traveling and commuting to work? And so part of that feedback we kind of took it in two different directions. One was this commuter heat map concept. What we found in our survey was that this hospital that has over 7,000 associates, there was a response where it found our associates did not think their coworkers lived anywhere near them. So therefore they could not carpool. So although their immediate coworker might not live right directly next to them, we did a heat map that showed, based on our associates coded to work at that hospital using their zip code, we could identify bubbles and pockets of people that lived really close to our hospital. So you can see that emblem with that kind of blue and white hash marks. That's our main hospital. Those numbers surrounding it are buckets of people that live near that hospital. So there are 1,500 people that live within 2 miles of that hospital. So we target those population of associates, get them to know each other, and realize that they could carpool to work together. And then we can even manipulate this map to show different shifts of workers, because we are a hospital. This is a 24/7 operations. We have 3 different shifts. We could actually manipulate that map to show the different shifts of people working there. So that was a big educational piece for us. And then next was this pilot program. As Jordan mentioned, we did go to the Ignite Action Fund, get grant money for them to work on reducing our single occupant vehicles. We found through the survey over 90% of our associates travel to work by themselves. So we incentivized our associates to commute differently, educated them on how to do so, tracked it through a multimodal transportation platform, and found that over 200 associates in that 3-month period signed up for this platform and 15% of them actively stayed engaged through the pilot and after. So it was a big educational component for us. We found a lot of success based off of that survey and knowing how to incentivize behavior change. Another educational piece was this ride and drive. We did that at 3 different ride and drives at 2 hospitals and 1 just regular 9-to-5 office building. We had over 212 test drives take place during those 3 ride and drives. And we found that 15% of our associates, when asked, surveyed post-drive, were actually asked to be contacted by a dealer. So we found a lot of success in getting behind the wheel and seeing kind of how exciting the technology of an electric vehicle can be. If we go to the next slide. So some other work we've done is with our fleet. So from a fleet assessment standpoint, we actually partnered with Electrification Coalition as well as Smart Columbus to put telematics GPS devices in 10 of our lab courier vehicles. These are essentially vehicles that are running throughout our different care sites in Central Ohio, transporting lab specimens around. We targeted these vehicles based on their high mileage we see, so kind of really pushing the potential of electrification. And they were traveling around cities. So we wanted to make sure that we really could test out the most feasible options for these vehicles. We needed them to be able to charge overnight. Because of the time sensitivity of the specimens to travel back and forth, we couldn't rely on charging on route. So we looked specifically at the feasibility to have an electric vehicle that can charge overnight. And on the right here, you can see kind of the results that we received from that study, essentially showing how feasible, how confident we are in how that vehicle, that specific route could go electric, what type of vehicle could be put in place, and the operational and net savings from doing so. So we found that 9 out of 10 of our lab couriers could go all electric, with one of them as a hybrid electric vehicle, and every single one of them showing savings in doing so. So what we did next, Matt, is put kind of the procurement policy in place based on these telematics results. So we purchased our first electric vehicle for our lab courier services. You can see it here on the right. Very proud of this car. This was a big partnership internally for us. This is our first electric vehicle. It's been hugely successful. We have seen operational savings already, no complaints whatsoever, which is also a success. And it has not had any maintenance needed. So this is a huge positive for our departments that are kind of able to move these operational savings and budget differently. And we've also set a new procurement policy in place moving forward. So all new vehicles that are requested by the different departments that go through capital have to be assessed for electrification potential. So that goes internally, they fill out a form, goes internally to our fleet management team, and it requires them to be assessed for electrification potential. Because this vehicle was so successful and championed by the department, they have a lot of departments coming forward now and actually proactively requesting electric vehicles. So this has been really success for us. And you can go to the next one. And then finally is this workplace charging piece of it. As I mentioned before, we have nearly 60 level 2 charging stations across our system. Like Jordan mentioned, a lot of this is based on rebates we received from AEP Ohio that allowed us to kind of really push our care sites to put in charging stations. And a big piece of this, kind of from lessons learned, was putting standards in place from the beginning for all charging stations moving forward. So we picked one single vendor. Looking ahead, every charging station will be the same. It'll be a networked charging station who allows us to get data from them. We then decide where the charging stations are going to go. We ensure that we install charging stations at our workplace, so for our associates, but also public-facing stations. So we're about at a 50-50 mix throughout our system, ensuring that we have both publicly available and associate-only charging stations. We also made sure that we have signage and stenciling standards in place. So this is an example of a sign you'll see. Made sure it said electric vehicles charging only. because once you get charging stations in place, then you get people charging at those, and you realize you have more electric vehicles than you have stations. So you just need to make sure that they are charging at them and not just parked there all day. And then moving forward, we've also worked on new construction and renovation standards. So we will be partnered with our construction team to ensure all new construction will have at minimum the electric infrastructure in place for a level 2 charging station. And then best case scenario, we have minimum charging stations in place for both workplace and public facing locations. And this, if you get this in moving forward, this is really going to show savings. So you're not going to be kind of trenching out to your parking lot, looking ahead. You're going to have this infrastructure in place. So installing charging stations is really a cost saver. And then we've also worked with Smart Columbus to start up a parking lot stencil share program. So not every single organization throughout Columbus has to buy their own stencil with this kind of that EV symbol to put on the parking spot. We purchase the stencil and we share it with other organizations because it's really a one-time use. So they can work with us to kind of paint their spots using the same stencil, and it just furthers that standard image of EV parking. You can go ahead. So moving forward, what we're really looking to do is take what we've learned with Smart Columbus and continue our fleet efficiency efforts. This is something that we didn't realize before Smart Columbus. We're a healthcare facility, that's our main focus. But in the efforts around fleet, we can make it more efficient to provide healthcare services for our patients. We're also going to be looking at expanding fleet charging infrastructure. So right now, our current electric vehicle charges on an existing public-facing station at one of our care sites. What we're looking to do is provide and expand fleet-only charging stations. So as we look to purchase more electric vehicles, we will have fleet chargers in place for them. And then continuing these mobility commuting education for our associates, because it was so successful for us. I'm really looking to provide that education piece moving forward. So nothing is going to stop kind of once these goals have been reached by Smart Columbus. This is something we found to be really successful internally for us. So something we're looking to further because it does play into that accessibility piece for healthcare. So that's what we have done really, really quickly, high overview, but I'm going to turn it back over to the team.
Thank you, Allegra. It's amazing to see all of that summarized, and just a real proof point, I think, of what is possible when you partner with companies. We would have never been able to do any of that as a team independent of the leadership from within the company, Allegra, and all the work that you've done across all the departments. Every example had multiple collaborations inside the company that you've handled masterfully to get that much progress in such a amount of time. So kudos to you, and great to see it showcased here. As we think about culminating Allegra as an example of 60 other companies that are going down this road with her, and collectively, we also have a full other portfolio of engagements, but we really wanted to measure how we could change consumer perception alongside purchases, because one of the greatest things that we thought we'd have the opportunity to do was really to establish long-term commitment and a viable, sustainable market for electric vehicles in our community. This was such an intensive investment, and we were so fortunate to have had it for 3 years. How do we keep this thing going? And it certainly is not it's not able to go on its own. They're going to continue to need to be community interventions, and significant ones at that, to get us beyond the early adoption phase. But I think these results that we were able to measure really prove that we have started to turn the tide within that population we were targeting over the past few years. So Navigant looked at before and after the program, really, and you'll see these are differences of change of perceptions and relationships to plug-in electric vehicles that we've seen in our community. So again, I shared earlier, and I'll just re-emphasize for the point of this, we really believe that you don't buy a car unless you try it first, or you've either had a friend that has it or a colleague that has it, or you've been in that vehicle or you've tried it at a dealership. And so when we started, the low percentage of people that have ever had a firsthand experience in electrification absolutely equated to the low adoption rate. And so we're seeing those numbers substantially increase, and we believe that that is a lot to do with the Ride and Drive Roadshow, but also more people have electric vehicles. And by having that, there are more of your neighbors that have it, or your carpools, all of the like. So this, we believe, is a big indicator to forecast future consideration. And then the second indicator that we really thought was important was overall their favorable impressions of a plug-in electric vehicle. And we were seeing hovering between the relationship of about 50% and seeing a strong increase to over 60% in both plug-in hybrids and full battery electric favorability impressions among that early adopter profile. So that's another really critical indicator that helps us believe that this consideration future over the next few years, that electrification is more likely to be in that set of options than ever before within the consumer market and the early adopters primarily here in Columbus. And then furthermore, looking at then from the consideration, well, what is the actual likelihood? And this is the primary indicator we looked at for that, and just kind of this intent to purchase. And I think what you're seeing is a greater increase in extremely likely, and that kind of, I guess, that little scroll bar there, moving from the somewhat likely really to more of a likely scenario. And again, we think as the product lineups continue to get new models, greater ranges, more options within each brand, we will continue to see that that move. So we're really encouraged by that as well. So what is next for us? Obviously the grant, if you didn't know this, the grant has come to an end. We've submitted our final report in June, and amidst COVID, that has certainly been more of a challenge to educate residents on electrification when very few people are really moving a lot. So we have certainly been thinking about all of those considerations and circumstances, but our ambition to continue in electrification is very much still alive. You go to the next slide for me, Matt. We think that if you look at the trajectory, and we know many of this is going to start to change a little bit, but the supply chains and the commitment of brands seems to be still pretty strong for the new introductions of electric vehicles. And we anticipate seeing that go through 2025. And we're seeing increased SUV options, but also, of course, trucks and other form factors. But in that lineup, we acknowledge that most of those vehicles that I just showed you were in a very high price point. And so if we really want to get beyond that traditional early adopter profile and into an early majority, and maybe even redefine who the majority is, we have to think differently about how we solve for equity in electrification and make sure electrification is something equitable and accessible to more residents. So we are really interested in exploring the used EV market. Many of the EVs that were bought in this first period will come back on lease next year or the year after, and we anticipate seeing some of the more Bolt and other lower price point vehicles being a part of that first wave. And so that would really give a lower price point vehicle as a true option with longer range for residents that's never really existed before. So we're treating that like a new car, and getting the community really excited about those options is a priority for us. And then thinking about how electrification fits in shared mobility is important. Go ahead. Obviously, batteries and the battery range is important. We're trying to keep up with those trends there to understand how what the future battery ranges will be, which then inform our charging strategies. Where do we need fast charging? Where do we need public charging? How important are level 2s in the future? All of those types of things are directly related to the vehicles on the road. We're not trying to discount the legacy models that are on the road, but we think the greatest purchasing will be in the future. And so we just want to make sure that we make as many future-proofed investments for this infrastructure and be smart about it as we can. So we've been really closely partnering with our utility to really understand what that can be and what that next regional charging strategy should be for the community and how we can engage partners to bring that to life. But more than anything, we don't want to lose sight of the bigger community opportunity here, which is electrification is a means to an end, which is to really lead in climate and to achieve our net neutrality goals by 2050. And we think that in electrifying the transportation sector, that's the biggest way that we can make a difference, but that's not without also thinking about renewable energy and energy efficiency and the role of our utility as well. And so we are very conscious of this and thinking of it as a full ecosystem. So we look forward to the next announcement of our next program to be really holistic in nature of thinking about how we can best make a difference in these spaces. So with that, just want to re-emphasize that please ask any questions and I'll turn it back over to Jennifer.
Great. Thank you all for your presentations. We have a couple questions coming in and you can still enter your question in the chat box. If we don't get to all of them, we can follow up with you via email after this event. Jordan, I'm going to start with you because we have a couple questions coming in about auto dealers. So Stuart is asking, did the auto dealerships locally have a reasonable supply of EVs at the beginning of the program? And similarly, that asks kind of how did we engage dealers, kind of acknowledging they might have some what could be perceived as disincentives to sell EVs. So could you talk about the way we engage dealers?
Sure. Great questions. We approach dealers really early on in our program in a very casual nature, meeting with the owners and then bringing them together in roundtables with their bankers, actually, to really just have a non-threatening conversation about what our program was, what we wanted to achieve, and how they could be a part of it. And that opened up a bigger dialogue about the future of dealerships, the future of mobility, and how these things all start to play a part. And from there, we developed a program that we enlisted them in, similar to the framework of the Accelerator Partner Program. It had similar commitments, really collective goals that they would be working to achieve together. But it was built on a framework of how we felt they would be best prepared to educate and sell electric vehicles to our market. And that really alludes to one of those questions of did they have inventory to begin with? At the time when we started the program, not really. Less than 50% of all available EVs were actually available on a lot of a dealer. We got to about 60%, a little over 60%. Matt, you can correct me if I'm wrong there, but I think it was 60% by the end of the program. And that is still going to be one of our greatest challenges. We are not a ZEV state. And so oftentimes when the distribution kind of plans are set for certain models, Ohio is not in that list of priority markets, but we were able to, the difference we were able to make up in that was substantial for a market our size and for a market in our state. And that we really believe is because of very strong relationships, both with the dealer, but both with our OEMs. We met with every OEM to introduce them to our program, talking about the significant investment we were going to be making into education, that we would be bringing demand to them. And while they couldn't make commitments, that was then coupled with dealers that were willing to go at risk to buy the vehicles to then sell in the market. So we definitely had a good relationship on both angles there. And I think that was a recipe for success. But I think the electrified dealer program was a way to build, I think, direct relationship with the dealer so that there was a face to the program and there was some accountability to the commitments that they were making to be a part of this movement. And then we tried to incentivize them in small ways that I think ended up being really meaningful. So for instance, in the Ride and Drive Roadshow, we didn't have any dealers on site, but residents that participated could opt in to a dealer contacting them. And if they opted in, then based off the vehicle model they tried, that would go to the dealer to then get that lead and follow up. Similarly, we opened a downtown showroom or experience center where we facilitated over 450 test drives. And that was primarily customers that were further into consideration of purchase. They knew they were going to come buy a vehicle and they just wanted to test drive a few different models in one place without the dealer pressure. And in those environments, when they wanted to opt in, which was at a higher rate of dealer opt-in, those also were given exclusively to our electrified dealers. And then similarly on the website. So when residents came to learn about electric vehicles on our website, again, you were led and connected into dealers. And then we also promoted the incentives that dealers would offer on their vehicles. And that helped extend their reach and really connect with the customers that were most interested in electrification. So I think we were able to also offer them something and not just make it a mandate and with nothing for them either, that we tried to give them some incentive to be a part of the program as well.
Thanks, Jordan. Alexa, I'm going to toss a question from you. Bill asks, how much do you charge your employees for charging their EVs at Ohio Health?
We made the decision to not charge anything, to charge their cars at any of our care sites. That goes for visitors and patients as well as our own associates. I will note that our associates do not pay for parking at any of our care sites. So to provide free charging to them is seen as an additional HR benefit for our associates. And then for our patients and visitors, we also kept it free. The thought process was, we're kind of getting this started up. We wanted to just provide the infrastructure in place. We wanted to promote cleaner fuels in our community. And if you're at a hospital, it generally is not expected. So we wanted to kind of alleviate any potential range anxiety there or true issues with range in case they needed to kind of have an emergency visit to the hospital. I will also add that the charging stations we decided to put in place do have the potential to charge for a cost around either electric draw or time there. So if we decide to change this policy at any point, we do have the flexibility to do so. So when you are thinking about standards for what type of charging station to put in place, I would definitely consider that for your facility. But for us, it was, at least for the immediate future, we see it staying as free charging.
Thanks, Allegra. And Matt, you at the Electrification Coalition have some experience in advising private companies on policies to establish as they're thinking about EV charging. What are some of the best practices that you recommend?
Yeah, Allegra is really a good case of one of our many partners who we had to work with through the Smart Columbus program to help them just navigate the whole world of workplace charging. And actually on the accelerateyourcity.com website, if you go there and look at the playbook content, you can actually find a workplace charging plan of action that we developed with the Smart Columbus program. That was really developed so we can have a little bit of a turnkey solution that we could give to any of the accelerator partners or any organization for that matter to really help guide from like step one, have a meeting around what is an electric vehicle and what is charging, to all the way to putting the chargers in the ground, celebrating it, getting the ribbon cut on it, and having employees or the public use it. And so with that, we capture a lot of that thought process. The biggest things I'd really encourage are threefold. One, surveying never hurts. So the more that you can survey, especially asking the specific question, not do you own an EV, but would you purchase an electric vehicle if the workplace were to put in a charger? That's a really helpful way to estimate scaling of more chargers that you might need. Some of our partners that we worked with, they put in charging and then they quickly found they were quickly utilized 100% because a lot more folks actually bought EVs. It's a really big decision tipping point for some employees. Second big thing to look at then is any available incentives that might be available. We were really lucky to work with American Electric Power on providing some of that incentive funding. And then third, as Allegra was alluding to, think about what's the typical traffic flow and type of visitors that you have coming to your property. Is it a lot of public? Is it a lot of employees? There's definitely that option where you can charge a fee, be it to cover the cost of electricity, or even just think of it as an economic driver so people don't park their car there the entire day. And so there's a little bit of a balancing act there. As Allegra alluded to with the hospital, that's a very different dynamic than a dedicated workplace that's only employees parking there.
Thanks, Matt. Allegra, I'm going to come back to you. Tony asked, what brand of chargers did Ohio House install and why, and how are they performing for you?
So we've moving forward with ChargePoint charging stations, and again, we have level 2s only. We chose this brand based off of the data capabilities, and again, the ability to charge a fee in the future if we'd like. We found the data to be most impactful and helpful for us. I use it to track greenhouse gas emissions reductions, but our planners and our architects team have been able to kind of use the data and kind of how many people are charging at them and usage time to kind of predict future builds, how many charging stations we need for different facility types. So they've found the data to be really helpful for them as well. It also helps our parking services team identify if a station is down, if there's issues charging, or if it's on the behalf of the driver themselves. We have so far not had any issues with these charging stations. They do have a number on there if our drivers don't know how to use them, which has been the majority of the kind of issues we've had is just on the driver side, and there is a number on the machine to call. We've had some other stations installed previous to Smart Columbus that were kind of gifted to the hospitals, such as Tesla and Clipper Creek stations. Those get a lot of usage. However, they don't provide the data. And from those lessons learned, we found that the data is really valuable for us in helping to, like I said, predict future infrastructure needs at different facility types.
Thanks, Allegra. And I think last one we have time for today, Jordan, I'm going to talk to you. Blair asked, were you able to incorporate used EVs into the program?
So we were not able to substantially incorporate used EVs in our program. I would say we had a great relationship with Clean Fuels Ohio, as well as Drive Electric Ohio, which is the owners group. And the owners group is extremely active in Columbus, and they have engaged owners in tailgates where they could show their vehicles using those the vehicles that they have. But you know, we didn't have a substantial effort around used EVs just because most of the new vehicles being introduced had range levels that seemed to be most attractive to that early adopter market that we were working with. We did see in the dealers that were both new car dealers and used car dealers, we could find ways to collaborate with them on both sides of their operation. But it definitely was an area where we've identified we want to lean into it more, and we understand there's some complexity about inventory and which inventory a dealer can actually get supplied and how it goes off into certain markets. But we think it's worth tackling, and we think it's really worth building up the density of options that people have to buy of used EVs in this next chapter.
Thanks so much to our panelists today, Matt, Jordan, Allegra. We appreciate your time. Thanks to everyone who joined us. We encourage you to check out accelerateyourcity.com, where you can learn more about the Acceleration Partners program. You can learn more about our dealer program. And we invite you to join us in a few weeks On September 8th, we'll be hosting one more webinar on charging infrastructure and how we worked with AEP Ohio to fortify the regional charging infrastructure in Central Ohio. So thanks so much to our panelists and to everyone for joining us today. We hope to see you in the next one.